In this video, I want to discuss the Baroque period of music, which roughly spans the time frame from 1600 to 1750. When talking about the Baroque style, we have the word Baroque. What does the word Baroque mean? It actually is derived from the Portuguese barroco, and actually I think it means an irregularly shaped pear, which seems like kind of a strange way to describe a whole period in art here. One way of interpreting the word Baroque is that it is extravagant, complex, bizarre, and flamboyant, and those aren't exactly flattering words to describe any of the arts as well there. However, even though the visual art doesn't totally coincide with the Baroque music time period, there is some relationship between the visual arts and the musical arts as well. In essence, what you'll find in the Baroque style of art is that it fills space with some action and movement. And if you look at this part in the graphic nature of this Gentileschi's Judith slaying Holofernes, if you compare it to some earlier artworks from the medieval or Renaissance periods, there's a lot of suggested actions going on in this particular artwork. And the same thing can be said about much of the Baroque music, is that there is always some type of action and movement going on there as well. Now we could subdivide the Baroque period into three subdivisions of different musical styles, one being the early Baroque time period between 1600 to 1640, where there were more or less homophonic textures, the middle Baroque period where there was more of a switch to major and minor scales, and the late Baroque period where polyphonic music really evolved thanks to the work of Johann Sebastian Bach and George Friedrich Handel in particular. And it's probably the most remembered of the three subdivisions, and it's going to be the focus of our musical study here in this class. Now, some of the late Baroque characteristics that you might find in a lot of music that we could, there's always going to be exceptions, but this can be some general characteristics that you can use to identify some late Baroque music. One, that each piece has a sense of unity of mood, that when there's one piece, it usually reflects one affection or one mood that is characterized by that piece. In that regard, a lot of composers associated various melodies and rhythms with certain affections. The rhythm you'll find in a lot of Baroque music, particularly instrumental music, was very continuous and rarely stopped, had this sort of relentless continuity to it that is very indicative of this musical style, with a strong sense of beat to it, more so than had been done in past music. As far as the melody is concerned, a lot of the melodies weren't necessarily easy to sing, very elaborate and ornamental. More focused on the capabilities of what the instrument that a lot of the music was played on could possibly do. And yes, there were a lot of cadence points for some of these melodies and pieces, but a lot of times it's hard to notice because a lot of times the melodies would overlap one another. When one musical idea ended, then another one continued. As far as the dynamics is concerned, you'll hear a technique that was used quite often in the Baroque time period called terrace dynamics. You all know in an agricultural context, a terrace means to turn land into terraces or put them on different levels. And the same thing goes with the late Baroque terrace dynamics, where you hear a lot of changes in dynamics from extreme louds to extreme softs, and then less crescendos and diminuendos in between there. So there was always these shifts of mood, and a lot of that was reflected in the dynamics. Part of that is why that is the case was that the harpsichord, the predecessor to the modern-day piano, could only do one dynamic level at a time. And as I mentioned earlier, the texture was mainly polyphonic thanks to the work of Johann Sebastian Bach, who is kind of thought of as the master of polyphonic music during this time period, if not of all music history. But then other composers such as George Friedrich Handel put together works that alternated between both homophonic and polyphonic textures. A lot of times the chords, the bass line was the focal point of the compositions, and this led to most of the Baroque music featuring what we called a basso continuo, a figured bass. This is actually kind of like the Baroque equivalent of what maybe you might see in a rhythm section in a jazz band, where there's an accompaniment of at least two different instruments, where the organ or a harpsichord in most cases was accompanied by some type of bass instrument such as a cello or bassoon. One popular genre that emerged in the Baroque time period was called the Concerto Grosso. A Concerto Grosso was a piece that featured a small group of soloists that were playing against a larger group there. And the larger group that you usually hear in these concerti grosso were called the tutti. Tutti, I like that word, tutti. Tutti means, marked in the score, means for everyone to play, and there were generally 8 to 20 performers in the tutti that consisted of usually a string orchestra and also the basso continuo instruments. And the soloist group was actually called the Concerto Grosso and consisted of perhaps 2 to maybe up to 4 soloists. Concerto Grosso usually had 3 movements, 3 different pieces that could stand on their own there, and they had a break in between, but usually went in the formula of fast, slow, fast. And the first and third movements generally were in Ritornello form. You should know this term, Ritornello. Ritornello literally means return or refrain, going back, in essence, the tutti and the soloist take turns playing within the musical context. This is an outline of basically what a ritornello form is, where there's this first cycle where the tutti plays the ritornello or the main melody, forte in the home key, and then the soloists play a contrasting section. And then you have a second cycle where the tutti is played again, plays the ritornello again, but just in a fragment, not the whole melody, and then the soloists play another contrasting section again. So again, you're getting this kind of ABA format that is kind of elaborated in a little bit more detail in this ritornello form. And this cycle can continue on and on until the composer has decided that the tutti will play the ritornello forte again in the home key to give a sense of finality. Those of you who have the CDs that come with the textbook, there's an example of a Concerto Grosso by Johann Sebastian Bach. This is not Johann Sebastian Bach. This is the Margrave Christian Ludwig of Brandenburg, otherwise known as the Margrave of Brandenburg. And there was a set of concerti that Johann Sebastian Bach composed in dedication to this wonderful patron of music and the arts, the Margrave of Brandenburg. And this is the 5th Brandenburg Concerto. It is a Concerto Grosso where the soloist includes the flute, violin, and harpsichord. The harpsichord is not generally thought of as a solo instrument, but Bach made it so in this particular concerto. And of course the tutti includes the string orchestra and the continuo. If you go to the online learning center at mhhe.com/Camian6, go to Part 3, Chapter 3, there's actually a capstone activity. It's not required for you to do for this chapter, but I bring it to your attention because the section on the Concerto Grosso is on Brandenburg Concerto number 5 that we were just talking about a second ago. You could read a little bit more about this here. No, you're not required to do anything here with this here, but if we click play, you'll notice that it has the whole concerto played for you and a really great online outline of the way that the ritornello works here. All right, the main melody of the ritornello, of course, going. And you can even follow along on the listening outline in your textbook on page 105 to go along here. There's even a cute little game here where you can play like an excerpt from one of the sections and see if you can match it up with one of the parts. That sounds like the opening there, so I'm going to take that and drag that button there. And then you see how that works there. And it won't work in other places there. But you don't have to do that activity. You will have to do it in the rondo section, in the classical section, but you don't have to do it for this one. But a great resource here to explore and improve your listening skills of this Concerto Grosso form.